Okay, let's unpack this. Think about mergers and acquisitions. The big headlines, the huge potential for growth, expanding reach. It all sounds very exciting.
It really does. Months, maybe years of planning, right? Financial teams, legal teams, poring over every single detail.
Exactly. Planning this perfect corporate marriage. But what if, after all that careful work, something absolutely critical gets missed? Something looking just out of sight that could actually sink the whole deal.
Yeah, and we're talking about cyber risk here, aren't we, in M&A? You'd sort of assume, given how digital everything is, that cybersecurity would be right there at the top of the checklist.
You would think so. But looking at the sources you brought, it's often not the reality.
And that's what's really striking, maybe even a bit concerning. The data shows that business leaders know cyber risk is serious. I think one report mentioned, 26% of global leaders rank it as a key technological risk. They see the danger.
They acknowledge it's a big threat.
Yet, and here's the kicker, less than 10% of M&A deals actually involve, a deep scrutiny of the target company's cybersecurity practices.
Wow, less than 10%. That's a huge disconnect between awareness and action, isn't it?
It really is. And the consequences of just glossing over it, they're not small. We're talking significant financial hits, massive operational disruption, and serious damage to reputation.
The classic example always seems to be Yahoo and Verizon, right? That cautionary tale.
Exactly. Verizon was set to buy Yahoo for, I think, around US $4.5 billion initially.
But then these huge, undisclosed data breaches at Yahoo surfaced before the deal closed.
Yeah, and that wasn't just a minor hiccup. It fundamentally altered the deal's value. The final price tag dropped by US $350 million.
$350 million. Just like that.
And that wasn't even the end of it for Yahoo. They also had to pay out an extra US $80 million to shareholders because of lawsuits tied to those breaches. It just shows you the kind of penalties and the direct impact on value if cyber due diligence isn't done properly.
And it's not like that was a one-off thing. We see this pattern again and again. Marriott and Starwood had that breach, leading to a fine of nearly $24 million.
Right, or the United Health Group and Change Healthcare situation. The estimated impact there is staggering, somewhere between $2.3 and $2.45 billion, linked to issues post-acquisition.
And these risks aren't just internal to the company being bought.
No, not at all. Vendor failures, the third-party connections, are actually highlighted as a fast-growing source of claims related to M&A cyber incidents.
When you step back and look at the bigger picture, the potential cost is enormous. Global cybercrime is projected to cost companies something like $10 trillion by 2025.
Over $10 trillion. It's almost hard to comprehend. And M&A activity itself can unfortunately act as a catalyst, making things worse. Ransomware claims, for instance, have spiked a 400% increase recently, often hitting companies during that vulnerable integration period.
And the ultimate impact on the deal itself. One source mentioned that over 55% of M&A deals don't actually deliver their expected value. Poor integration is a big reason, and unmanaged cyber risks are definitely a key part of that failure equation.
Absolutely. So this deep dive today is really about helping you, the listener, understand this critical area. We're using the stack of sources you provided to explore why these cyber risks are so significant in M&A, the specific forms they take, and crucially, what companies can actually do about it.
Right. Whether you're directly involved in M&A or just want to understand how these big corporate shifts impact security, our mission is to pull out the key insights from this research.
And it's important to grasp that the risks go way beyond just, plugging two IT systems together. The sources show a much more complex picture, a diverse landscape of potential dangers you inherit.
Right. You're not just getting their servers and software. You're getting their baggage, too, including existing weaknesses. That's what one source calls inherited vulnerabilities.
Exactly. Undisclosed breaches from the past that might still be causing problems, maybe outdated systems that are just waiting to fail. It all becomes your responsibility literally overnight.
And sometimes it's the really basic stuff that trips companies up, isn't it? Like domain names expiring because no one transferred ownership properly or not getting the right admin passwords.
Simple things, yeah, but they can cause immediate operational chaos right after closing because you lack fundamental control.
Then there's the actual process of merging the IT systems. That takes time, right?
A lot of time. One source estimates, on average, about 18 months. And that entire period is basically a window of opportunity for attackers. You're creating temporary links, data might get stuck in silos, you're dealing with different security standards side by side. It's messy.
And the third-party and supply chain risks seem particularly tricky. They get amplified.
They really do. Think about it. All the vendors and partners connected to the company you just bought, they can suddenly become potential entry points into your network. Attackers know M&A creates confusion and oversight, so they actively target these third-party links.
And software supply chains themselves. That seems like a huge area of concern now.
Massive. Modern software is built on open source components, something like 70 to 90% of code, according to one source. And threats targeting those components, they exploded by 1,300% between 2020 and 2023.
1,300%.
Yeah. But many companies haven't really assessed the risks in the software libraries they're about to inherit through an acquisition. And the average cost, if that supply chain gets compromised, it's around $4.6 million.
Ouch. Okay, so technical debt, integration chaos, supply chains.
Yeah.
What else?
Well, then you have a whole regulatory and legal compliance minefield. Different companies often follow different data privacy rules, GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California, maybe high pay if they're in healthcare.
And when you merge, especially across borders, you could suddenly be non-compliant.
Exactly. Without careful planning, the combined company might violate rules in multiple jurisdictions, and the penalties are steep GDPR fines can reach 20 million euros, or 4% of global revenue. CCPA violations can hit $7,500 each.
These aren't just potential fines either, are they? They can actually stop deals.
They absolutely can. One source said over half of M&A participants run into cyber risks serious enough to jeopardize the entire deal. Sometimes deals collapse entirely, like the proposed Facebook takeover of Musical.ly, which reportedly stalled partly due to data privacy concerns.
Okay, so technical, supply chain, legal.
Huh.
But the sources also really emphasize the people aspect.
Yes, hugely important and often underestimated. One source puts it very starkly. During M&A, people effectively become the new security access perimeter.
That makes a lot of sense. You're suddenly bringing potentially thousands of new users onto your network.
And you don't necessarily know the security posture of their devices, their past online habits, their level of security awareness. You're inheriting all of that uncertainty.
Plus, the disruption itself creates risks. Right? People might be unsure about their roles, maybe disgruntled.
Precisely. Changes in management, unclear responsibilities, even deliberately malicious actions from unhappy employees during that transition phase. These are real internal threats. And simple user error skyrockets when everyone's trying to learn new systems and procedures under pressure.
And then there's the culture clash.
Oh, definitely. Cultural misalignment is a known killer for M&A deals in general. One source cited 70% fail due to cultural issues, and that absolutely applies to security culture.
Trying to merge two organizations with potentially very different attitudes towards security, different policies, maybe different levels of basic cyber hygiene.
Yeah, think about maybe a smaller company with less mature security practices, what some call the cyber poverty line, suddenly integrating with a large corporation. It's much harder to unify those mindsets and behaviors than it is to just merge the tech tools.
So just checking for a SOC2 certificate isn't enough.
Not nearly enough. You need to understand how security actually works in practice, day to day. How is it operationalized?
Wow. Okay, this deep dive into the sheer complexity of M&A cyber risks really underscores how vital it is to have the right information and resources. Whether you're assessing risk in a potential deal or just trying to secure your own organization after growth.
Absolutely. Which makes this a good moment to acknowledge our sponsors who help make these kinds of detailed explorations possible.
First up, check out www.cyberinsurancekelsey.com. Understanding your potential financial exposure from cyber incidents is crucial, especially in an M&A context, and cyber insurance is a really important piece of that risk management puzzle.
Definitely worth looking into. And also visit CISOmarketplace.com. Finding the right expertise to navigate these challenges, from specialized due diligence analysts to post-merger integration experts, is essential. CISOmarketplace.com is a great resource for connecting with those specialists.
Okay, so we've established the problem. The risks are significant, they're varied, and they're often missed early on. Given all that, what's the way forward? The sources seem unanimous on this.
Yes, incredibly clear. Robust cybersecurity due diligence before the deal is signed is absolutely essential. It's not a nice to have, it's a must do.
You have to get ahead of it, right?
Yeah.
Identify and start addressing these risks during the negotiation and planning phase.
Exactly. And the sources provide some really useful checklists and frameworks for what to look for during that diligence.
Like digging into the target's overall risk profile, their size, their complexity, who they're connected to.
Yes, and understanding their own internal risk assessments. What have they found? How did they respond? Does it seem adequate?
And the legal side, too. Which regulations do they follow? Are they different from yours? Any past issues with regulators?
Crucial. Checking licenses, past warnings, or fines. Who actually manages those relationships with regulatory bodies?
And really drilling down on data privacy laws, CCPA, GDPR, HIPAA sector-specific rules, looking for red flags like outdated privacy policies.
Absolutely. You need to verify compliance there. Then, during the transaction, you need to conduct actual security assessments.
Like getting hands-on.
Yes, getting a full inventory of their assets, physical, logical, software, reviewing their key plans, incident response, business continuity, disaster recovery, how do they manage vendors, access control policies, how does their physical security integrate?
And looking for evidence of past breaches, assuming something might have happened already.
That's a smart assumption, according to the sources. Assume breaches might have occurred and investigate how they were handled. Was the response effective? Was remediation complete?
Then there's the technical vulnerability assessment, finding software flaws, checking their patching habits.
Right, and assessing risks in their operational technology, the OT systems, if they have them. Those often have unique vulnerabilities.
You also need to look at the tools they use. Like, are they using known risky software?
Yeah, things like older VPNs, outdated antivirus, maybe password managers that have had public security issues. Those need scrutiny.
And legacy applications, the old, maybe homegrown systems.
Definitely. Those often lack modern security standards like multi-factor authentication. They can be significant weak points that need to be identified.
And finally, managing what one source called identity provider sprawl, making sure all the different ways users log in can actually work together securely.
Yes, ensuring identity sources can integrate properly with all the necessary applications is a major technical challenge and a security risk if it's messy.
So digging into all of this during diligence gives the buyer a much clearer view of what they're actually getting into, security-wise.
Exactly, and it directly impacts the deal's valuation. Companies that can demonstrate stronger, more mature security and incident response capabilities, they tend to be valued higher. Good security actually adds value.
Okay, so thorough pre-deal diligence is step one. But what about staying secure during that messy integration phase and afterwards?
That's where having a really solid incident response plan, an IRP, is critical. That M&A integration period is like putting up a giant hack me sign because change and complexity create vulnerabilities.
The attackers know this.
They absolutely do. One source actually quantified it. 17% of security incidents during M&A happen specifically because of integration delays or problems.
So your IRP needs to be ready for that specific context.
Precisely. It needs clear steps for detection, containment, communication, both internal and external, and recovery.
And presumably, the two security teams need to work together on this.
Absolutely essential. Shared protocols, maybe even joint incident response teams during the transition. And running drills, simulating M&A-specific attack scenarios, is key to finding the gaps before a real incident.
Plus, there are regulatory drivers now, too, like the SEC's 4-day rule for reporting incidents.
Right, that makes having a tested, effective IRP basically non-optional for public companies.
This sounds like a situation where modern security models might really help. Zero Trust Access, ZTNA, came up in the sources.
Yes, ZTNA is highlighted as being particularly well-suited to the chaos of M&A integration.
The whole never trust, always verify idea.
Exactly. It fundamentally shifts the security posture. Instead of trusting someone just because they're inside the network perimeter, a perimeter that gets very blurry during M&A, ZTNA treats everyone, including those newly acquired employees, as potentially untrusted initially.
So it checks identity and device health every time someone tries to access something.
Continuously verifies, yes. And critically, it grants access only to the specific resources that person needs for their job, not broad access to the entire network. This principle of least privilege is incredibly valuable during integration.
Because you can bring people on board faster without giving them the keys to the kingdom immediately.
Precisely. It allows for much faster onboarding, potentially days instead of months, while significantly reducing risk. It enforces consistent security controls, whether the user is on a company laptop or their personal device, which often happens during transitions. It really simplifies integration and helps realize the deal's value sooner.
And there are platforms designed for this. One source mentions CISO.
Yes, platforms like CISO are built to address these challenges. They can help secure older, legacy apps with modern controls like MFA or single sign-on, provide visibility through monitoring and auditing, and help meet compliance needs. The goal is to make integrating employees both secure and relatively painless.
But even with great tech like ZTNA, we still have the human element, the cultural integration piece.
Absolutely cannot forget that. As we said earlier, cultural issues sink a lot of deals, maybe up to 70%, and merging security cultures is arguably one of the hardest parts.
How do you blend two different ways of thinking about risk, following procedures, just basic security habits?
It takes a lot of effort, respecting the acquired company's culture while gently but firmly guiding everyone towards a common high standard. It's a delicate balancing act.
In post-deal, there's the practical challenge of unifying everything: teams, tools, policies.
Huge task. Reviewing all the tech, deciding what stays, what goes, dealing with overlapping contracts, and aligning security policies. That often becomes, as one source rightly pointed out, quite political.
Where do you even start with the technical integration?
The sources suggest common starting points are often core systems like HR platforms, main business information systems, identity management, and the end-user computing environment. Desktops, laptops, basic productivity tools.
It sounds like success requires more than just technical skill, diplomacy, understanding the politics.
Especially for security leaders from the acquired company. They need strong, soft skills to navigate the new, often larger organization.
One expert also stressed listening, particularly to customers, after the deal closes.
Yes, a great point. Customers might surface security issues or frustrations that weren't obvious during diligence. You have to expect surprises post-merger and have a team ready, importantly, including empowered folks from the acquired company to tackle them. Definitely. It needs continuous monitoring, regular audits, testing controls, specific reviews of certain areas, and honest, open conversations about problems that persist, like data silos that just won't go away easily.
Navigating all this complexity, the technical, the human, the regulatory aspects of cyber risk in M&A, really requires solid planning, the right people, and the right tools.
Which brings us back to thanking our sponsors again for supporting this kind of in-depth discussion.
Absolutely. Find valuable resources and expertise at www.cyberinsurancekalsi.com for understanding financial exposure and insurance options.
And check out CISOmarketplace.com to connect with the specialized professionals who can help guide you through due diligence, integration, and beyond.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive. The big takeaway seems to be that M&A cyber risk is, well, it's incredibly real and multifaceted. You've got technical debt, people issues, supply chain complexities, compliance hurdles.
And it's surprisingly easy to overlook early in the deal process, yet it can have a massive impact on the deal's value and its ultimate success or failure.
We've seen that comprehensive due diligence is absolutely critical looking at people, processes, and technology. And building resilience through things like solid incident response plans and adopting modern security like zero trust is vital, especially during integration.
And maybe the toughest part is that cultural integration, the ongoing effort needed post-deal to truly unify security practices and maintain vigilance. That's just as important, maybe more so than the initial tech merge.
Right, so this wasn't just abstract theory. These are practical insights drawn straight from the research you provided, aimed at giving you, the listener, a clearer understanding of this landscape.
Which leaves us with a final thought to consider. As you think about M&A, or even just how interconnected businesses are today,
what aspects of cybersecurity due diligence or post-merger integration do you think are still the most underestimated in deals right now?
and how can companies really do a better job of bridging that gap? Is it still those human elements, the cultural integration, insider risk, or maybe the sheer complexity of modern software supply chains? Are those the persistent blind spots needing much more focus?
Definitely something to think about as companies continue to merge and evolve in this digital age.